We are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will accept the New World Order. David Rockefeller.
You people and 62 million other Americans are listening to me right now because less than 3% of you people read books. Because less than 15% of you read newspapers. Because the only truth you know is what you get over this tube. Right now, there is an entire generation that never knew anything that didn't come out of this tube. This tube is the gospel, the ultimate revelation. This tube can make or break presidents, popes, prime ministers. This tube is the most awesome goddamn force in the whole godless world. And woe is us if it ever falls into the hands of the wrong people. And when the 12th largest company in the world controls the most awesome goddamn propaganda force in the whole godless world, who knows what shit will be peddled for truth on this network. So you listen to me. Listen to me. Television is not the truth. Television is a goddamn amusement park. Television is a circus, a carnival, a traveling troupe of acrobats, storytellers, dancers, singers, jugglers, sideshow freaks, lion tamers, and football players. We're in the boredom-killing business. So if you want the truth, go to God. Go to your gurus. Go to yourselves, because that's the only place you're ever going to find any real truth. But man, you're never going to get any truth from us. We'll tell you anything you want to hear. We lie like hell. We'll tell you that Kojak always gets the killer and that nobody ever gets cancer in Archie Bunker's house. And no matter how much trouble the hero is in, don't worry, just look at your watch. At the end of the hour, he's going to win. We'll tell you any shit you want to hear. We deal in illusions, man. None of it is true. But you people sit there day after day, night after night, all ages, colors, creeds. We're all you know. You're beginning to believe the illusions we're spinning here. You're beginning to think that the tube is reality and that your own lives are unreal. You do whatever the tube tells you. You dress like the tube. You eat like the tube. You raise your children like the tube. You even think like the tube. This is mass madness, you maniacs. In God's name, you people are the real thing. We are the illusion. So turn off your television sets. Turn them off now. Turn them off right now. Turn them off and leave them off. Turn them off right in the middle of the sentence I'm speaking to you now. Turn them off.
The media, which forms part of this conspiracy, they've been able to convince the people that unless something is on the cover of the New York Times, the Washington Post, Le Monde, The Economist, Wall Street Journal, it doesn't exist. Which is why so many times people say to me, if what you say is true and it is shocking, why is it not on the cover of the New York Times? Because again, the New York Times of this world, they form part of the Bilderberg organization. They form part of all these other societies. They're part of the elite. Their job is not to tell the truth, but to sell a particular vision of reality which the elitists need to move their agenda forward.
Imagine a private club where presidents, prime ministers, international bankers and generals rub shoulders, and where the people running the wars, the markets and governments say what they never say in public.
Every year Bilderberg has a gathering. They'll bring together 100 to 200 people, many of whom make up the core of the transatlantic financial and political oligarchy. And they'll bring together a core group of powerful individuals, government people, the media, finance, and prospective young recruits, people in the political realm who are up and coming and who are going to be seduced and controlled by these oligarchical interests. And very often these meetings serve as a kind of a testing ground for whether or not certain people will be advanced in their political careers, including a number of individuals who've been elected President of the United States, have been put through this kind of Bilderberg finishing school process.
The Bilderberg Conference comprises about 130 of the world's, or Western world's, top decision makers from the banks, the multinational companies, the EU Commission. I'm coming to the politicians, also from WTO, IMF, World Bank, and of course, leading politicians from the US, Canada, Eurozone, and the UK. And I think, though they were clearly discussing some of the biggest issues confronting the Western economies at this time, why have we had no statement, either from the Prime Minister, or from the Chancellor, or indeed from the Minister without portfolio, all of whom intended in an official capacity? Why did they offer no statement, even though such decisions may well have a significant effect on UK government policy or the livelihood of future UK citizens?
Well, what this is actually is part of what's called globalization. You had in the 60s and then continuing in an expanding form in the 70s and 80s a rash of mergers which corporations merged, agricultural corporations merged, the financial institutions merged, and you had a general takeover of the world economy by these huge mega firms. The corporate banking mergers tended to control the corporate industrial mergers and the agricultural mergers. So you had basically a world run by this financial, these massive financial institutions.
You know, if you kind of go back in history, 6,000 years or so, and you look at who controlled society 6,000 years ago in ancient Egypt, this weren't the pharaohs. They were the high priests, who basically gave us knowledge one little droplet at a time, just enough knowledge for us to survive and get by as we do today, just enough for us to get by day to day to day to day with what meager salaries we earn. Now, so on the one hand, what you had back then, you had the high priests giving us this, droplets of knowledge. But on the other hand, in the last 6,000 years, especially now, with technological revolution, with information revolution, information technology, people have computers and have access to internet, and suddenly all this information, which for thousands of years, which was only available to secret societies and very private organizations who passed it on from generation to generation in very small, tightly knit groups behind the scenes, underground, grandfather to father, father to son, son to grandson, grandson, to great-grandson, etc. Today, 99% of that information is available through Google. And anybody sitting in the middle of an Amazon rainforest, with computer, a laptop, an internet connection, almost has the same access to the information which the secret societies have tried to protect or hide from us for thousands of years. So the dilemma for them is, what do we do? Because we must have the upper hand. So on the one hand, what you're seeing right now is they're destroying the world's economy on purpose, because again, progress and development is directly proportional to population density. So if you have technology, you have more. If you don't have technology, if you can destroy technology on purpose, if you can go to zero growth, deindustrialization, demand destruction, is going to get a point in the development of society where you're not going to have enough technology to support this rapid population growth, and the base of population is going to collapse.
What is being planned as you and I are on the air tonight, and what has been coming together into that old term, the perfect storm, is literally brewing right over our heads.
Looks to me like there's going to have to be a dramatic drop in population. That's exactly what the devil wants.
It is and includes military maneuvers in the United States, military actions that are forthcoming, and that will be so deep and so penetrating that the United States will never be the same.
And somebody mentioned, well, why would they want to reduce the human population when that means less money for them? Most people have no idea. They're not after money. They have all the money they need. They're after power.
The Bilderberger runs it, or the Trilateral, or the CFR, or Bohemian Grove, or whatever it is. All of those are power centers that jostle each other and coexist. But what they amount to is an oligarchy. The mentality of oligarchy always depends on the idea that there's an elite and a mass. And there can't be anything in between. There's really no room for a middle class in oligarchy. So the elite has to justify itself based on what? Why should they rule? Are they smarter? Are they more efficient? Are they better? They're probably none of those things. They're probably inferior in many ways. So they've got to find other ways to justify what is an irrational principle of domination. So oligarchs generally find ways to argue that the mass of people are inferior, that their lives are not worth living, and indeed that they're closer to animals than they are to the elite. Whenever you have an oligarchical elite, they're always going to try to portray the masses as ignorant beasts, inferior, and that's what we see.
If you're not familiar with the Georgia Guidestones, here's a couple of diagrams of it. Basically, it's the Illuminati's 10 Commandments. It's literally 10 Commandments carved in stone into granite slabs, these 20-foot tall slabs, in 8 different languages that basically call for a massive world human population reduction, a global government, a global court, and call human beings a cancer on the earth. And so basically this is a monument to the Illuminati's population reduction agenda. They see the masses of humans as being a bunch of useless eaters, using up the Earth's resources that they're going to need to live forever as gods on planet Earth. Ebola virus fears obviously adding fuel to this fire. But here we have a satanic monument calling for the death of, 95% of the world's population, reducing people down to 500 million people.
In the event that I am reincarnated, I would like to return as a deadly virus in order to contribute something to solve overpopulation. Prince Philip, reported by Deutsche Presseagentur, DPA, August 1988.
There is absolutely a plan to depopulate the world, and you simply have to listen to or read the writings of people like Prince Philip of Great Britain, who has stated explicitly that we should reduce the population of the world from 7 billion people down to 1 billion.
You know, we're living on a very small planet with limited natural resources and an ever-growing population base. If you extrapolate that into the near future, in one generation we're going to go to about 10 billion people, then we're going to go to 14, 18, 21. It's going to get to the point we're always going to have enough space, because 7 billion people space-wise is not a lot. But we are running out of food, and we are running out of water, and we're running out of natural resources. So for the elitists, for the Rockefellers of this world to survive, and I say Rockefeller not because he's important, but because he's well-known, he's popular, which is not the same as being important. For the Rockefellers of this world to survive, most of us have to die.
It is no secret that the land that the United Nations is built upon today was purchased with money donated by the Rockefellers. The official Rockefeller Archive Center has this to say on the matter, quote, John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s deep interest in international relations was reflected by his many contributions directed to international causes. Perhaps most outstanding in this field was his gift of $8,515,000 in December 1946 for the purchase of the land for the permanent home of the United Nations in New York, end quote. This land where the United Nations headquarters now sits in New York was originally owned by a prominent real estate developer named William Bill Zeckendorf. As the story goes, Nelson Rockefeller, on behalf of the United Nations, went to Zeckendorf with an offer to buy the property. Zeckendorf agreed, and Nelson's father, John D. Rockefeller Jr., donated the money to the United Nations in order to finance the purchase of the land. While this story is usually presented as just another selfless act of charity by the Rockefellers, there is some evidence to suggest that there were ulterior benefits associated with this donation. This Rockefeller support of the United Nations continued after the creation of the UN and continues to this day. It would be too much to list all of the ways that Rockefeller-related organizations contribute to the United Nations today, but their influence can be seen through examples like the Rockefeller Foundation providing grants to the United Nations, or the Rockefeller Brothers Fund funding the United Nations Foundation. More important, though, than the motive to make some money off of a land deal was the Rockefeller vision of a one-world government, as revealed on page 405 of David Rockefeller's autobiography, Memoirs. It is in this passage that David reveals his family's ultimate goal. Quote, For more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents such as my encounter with Castro to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interest of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure, one world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I am proud of it. End quote. The United Nations fits well into the Rockefeller family goal to build a more integrated global political and economic structure, one world. Through United Nations programs such as Agenda 21, local decision-making power is being eroded and being replaced by regional governments that continue to become more centralized.
Whatever the price of the Chinese Revolution, it has obviously succeeded, not only in producing more efficient and dedicated administration, but also in fostering high morale and community of purpose. The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in history. David Rockefeller, New York Times, August 10th, 1973.
There will be, in the next generation or so, a pharmacological method of making people love their servitude and producing dictatorship without tears, so to speak, producing a kind of painless concentration camp for entire societies, so that people will in fact have their liberties taken away from them, but will rather enjoy it because they will be distracted from any desire to rebel by propaganda or brainwashing enhanced by pharmacological methods. And this seems to be the final revolution. If you're going to control any population for any length of time, you must have some measure of consent. It's exceedingly difficult to see how pure terrorism can function indefinitely. It can function for a fairly long time, but I think sooner or later you'll have to bring in an element of persuasion, an element of getting people to consent to what is happening to them. It seems to me that the nature of the ultimate revolution with which we are now faced is precisely this, that we are in process of developing a whole series of techniques which will enable the controlling oligarchy who have always existed and presumably will always exist to get people to love their servitude. Aldous Huxley.
And here I would like briefly to compare the parable of Brave New World with another parable which was put forth more recently in George Orwell's book 1984. I'm inclined to think that the scientific dictatorships of the future, and I think there are going to be scientific dictatorships in many parts of the world, will be probably a good deal nearer to the Brave New World pattern than to the 1984 pattern. They will be a good deal nearer, not because of any humanitarian qualms in the scientific dictators, but simply because the Brave New World pattern is probably a good deal more efficient than the other. But if you can get people to consent to the state of affairs in which they are living, the state of servitude, the state of being, well, it seems to me that the nature of the ultimate revolution with which we are now faced is precisely this, that we are in process of developing a whole series of techniques which will enable the controlling oligarchy, who have always existed and presumably always will exist, to get people actually to love their servitude. People can be made to enjoy a state of affairs which, by any decent standard, they ought not to enjoy. And these methods, I think, are a real refinement on the older methods of terror, because they combine methods of terror with methods of acceptance. But then there are various other methods which one can think of. There is, for example, the pharmacological method. This was one of the things I talked about in Brave New World. And the result would be that, I mean, you can imagine a euphoric which would make people thoroughly happy even in the most abominable circumstances. I mean, these things are possible.
Gradually, by selective breeding, the congenital differences between rulers and ruled will increase until they become almost different species. A revolt of the plebs would become as unthinkable as an organized insurrection of sheep against the practice of eating mutton. Bertrand Russell.
What it shows, again, is the anti-human fanaticism, the genocidal fury of the Anglo-American ruling elite, that they hate people and they're determined to exterminate people, and that's what they're into. And if you want to live with a ruling class like that, it's going to be nasty, brutish, and short.
Diet, injections, and injunctions will combine from a very early age to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable, and any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible.
Get them put on lockdown. Everywhere is being closed down. My town. Just get them put on lockdown. Can't go out no more. She got a fat thing in the eyes now.
I appeared before the Congressional Committee to tell what I knew of activities which might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
They are the elitists. They feel they should run the world for their own selfish interests.
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order.
There is a chance for the President of the United States to carry out a phrase his father used, and that is a new world order.
National Socialism will use its own revolution for establishing a new world order. Adolf Hitler.
I think you need a new world order that China has to be part of the process of creating it, and they have to buy in. They have to own it the same way as, let's say, the United States owns the Washington Consensus, the current order.
And then I said, so what are the ultimate goals here? He said, the ultimate goal is to get everybody in this world chipped with the RFID chip, and have all money be on those chips and everything on those chips. And if anybody wants to protest what we do or violate what we want, we just turn off the chip.
In 1966, Professor Quigley published his major book on the secret society. It's called Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time. The tragedy was because, of course, of the terrible wars that we fought, World War I and World War II. The hope was that the secret society would accomplish their goal of creating a one-world government run by a ruling oligarchy, which Professor Quigley identified with and was very close to all of his professional life. But he wrote about them because he felt that people had a right to know history. And we're indebted to Professor Quigley for revealing what he revealed. Now, I know what he revealed is true because I went through his papers and I copied those papers, and of course I distributed them. So in case somebody came after me and tried to burn down my home or kill me, the papers would be in other people's hands, so they are, and we have several copies of all the papers distributed, so that, so far nothing's happened to me. And so we have then written as much as we could and talked as much as we could about what Professor tells us about the secret society that not only controlled England, it eventually came to be controlled by a front group. It's called the Royal Institute for International Affairs. It's located at number 10 St. James Square in London, and it is the group that controls your government. It dominates, it works closely with the monarchy. Your parliament in England is simply a front. They don't make the decisions. The decisions are made by the Royal Institute for International Affairs and the hierarchy that runs that. A comparable group was established in the United States in 1921, and that is the Council on Foreign Relations, which is located at 58 East 68th Street in New York City, and I've been there. I've been through their files on several occasions. And of course, the whole purpose of the Royal Institute, not only in England, but there are comparable groups in South Africa and New Zealand and Australia and in Canada and in most of the members of the British Commonwealth, which is really what joins the Commonwealth together. And the average Englishman has no idea because your media is controlled, and you're never going to have the chance of learning the truth that your electoral system, your so-called democratic process, is totally fraudulent. There's a small elite group made up of bankers and financiers and educators who believe in this concept of world government and are using the financial and military power of your country and, of course, of my country to bring about this world government.
The final step after the world's subjugated is to usher in the age of transhumanism, where the elite meld themselves with machine in some kind of attempt to gain immortality, while the people they let live, about 10% of us, will be their genetically dumbed down, engineered, subservient slaves. It's promising, I think, to bring humanity its darkest days. The people they let live they'll be living in, we know the megacities. There are 11 megacities planned. They're going to be densely populated with 6 million people, but that also tells you, too, how many of us they're going to wipe out. If you've got a country of 315 million people, and you've got 11 communities of 66 million total, that tells you what the casualty rate is. How they're going to get us to there, the pandemic releases that are going on right now. And the whole notion where this is headed, ultimately, is the Third World War. The bankers in Basel, the big guys that run the central banks, the Bank of International Settlements, want these wars of unification so they can bring about their new world order. There is no stopping it. America had its chance to mobilize and try to stop the coming tyranny, but we couldn't get off the couch, stop watching the NFL. Well, the new NFL term stands for not for long, and that's how much time this country has left. Americans have been wallowing in their own apathy and ignorance for decades. Soon they'll be wallowing in their own blood.
After a man has far more money than he possibly can spend for pleasures, what is left to excite him? For those with a ruling class mentality, the answer is power, raw power over other human beings. Money can buy such power only to a point. Beyond that, politics is the sport, and world politics is the ultimate game. These men are striving to create a world superstate, with the expectation that from behind the scenes, they will be the ones who will rule. If those who seek world dominion can stimulate leftist mobs into violent confrontation with local law enforcement, and also provide exhaustive news coverage so that the entire nation can see and tremble, then the peaceful and freedom-loving majority can be programmed to accept a vast expansion of government powers and even a national police force, offered supposedly to end the violence. If those who seek world dominion can raise the specter of an enemy armed to the teeth with superior atomic weapons on the verge of launching a nuclear holocaust, and also offer world government as the prevention, then millions of Americans can be programmed to accept the loss of national sovereignty as our last best hope for peace.